welcome to Your Intended Message. My guest today is Diane DiResta. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Diane. 1, as a speech pathologist, professional speaker, executive speech coach, and president of National Speakers Association, New York City, Diane has spoken on 4 continents and is the author of the Amazon category bestseller, Knockout Presentations. 2, her LinkedIn course, Speaking Confidently and Effectively, made the top 20 most popular courses in 2021 and 2022. And she's the host for Clubhouse Confidence, Clarity, Charisma. And 3, she's from a military family, which means she attended kindergarten and grade 3 in Germany. Diane, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you for having me, George. And I want to make one quick correction. I'm a past president of the New York chapter of National Speakers Association.
Past president.
Past president, yeah.
Past is in
the past. I don't want to have any skirmishes with the current president. I'm a past president.
Gotcha. And I'm wondering how your German kindergarten speaking is. Auf Wiedersehen.
Not gut. I remember a few words. I can say things like, what is your name? Hello, goodbye, things like that. But actually, it's funny. When I first met my father-in-law, I learned from my husband that his father had guarded German prisoners during the war. And so he learned some German. And he said, well, Daddy, Diane lived in Germany. So he said, Du liebst Kartoffel? And I said, yes, I like potatoes. And he looked at me like, how are you able to do that? So I do remember some, but it was so many years ago and I was never fluent, but it's interesting. I understood more than my parents did. So
the children always learn more.
Yeah.
And Diane, when it comes to presentations today and how people present, a big part of that is how they take their position, how they own the room, how they own their space. And we usually refer to that as presence.
Yes.
Is it a natural, inborn trait, or must it be learned? What do you say on that?
I don't think it's naturally inborn. It's a skill and it can be learned and by everybody. And so here's what's important, George. I get a lot of calls from companies saying they lack executive presence, they don't have gravitas. And then what happens is they can't define it. And, it's one of those things, it when you see it, but it's very hard to define. So it becomes my job to figure that out. And a part of executive presence is making sure that your intended message has the intended result. So I want to help define executive presence for the audience. And by the way, you don't need to be an executive to have presence. I started a class for 7th grade girls, 12-year-olds, many years ago, 2004, and I called it Confidence Class, and they had presence on their platform. So what is executive presence? Well, there is a researcher by the name of Sylvia Hewlett of Hewlett Consulting, and she's been studying and researching for years, and she came up with a definition. There are 3 attributes or qualities to executive presence, and those are gravitas, communication, and appearance. So then, how does that play out? What are the percentages? The biggest chunk, do you want to take a guess, or do you want me to tell you? Which do you think your listeners would say has the greatest clout? Is it the gravitas, the communication, or the appearance?
Now, when I hear gravitas, I somehow think that needs to be defined too, because I'm not sure what that is. So I don't know what gravitas is. Well,
okay, so I'm getting there. But first, gravitas is the biggest component, and it makes up 67% of the message. Or the definition. Communication is 28% and your appearance is 5% of executive presence, which surprised me. I thought it would be bigger than that, but not according to the research. So what is gravitas? There are a number of qualities or attributes, but the top two that you need to remember is confidence and decisiveness. Yes, there are other things around that, but as recent as 2021, this is what the research showed, that gravitas, the two qualities most valued, are confidence and decisiveness. So that's the first part of the equation. Communication, the top qualities were being clear and being concise. And I work so often with people just on the clarity alone. And then when it came to appearance, it was being polished and being authentic. Now, isn't that interesting? Because when you look back at some of the research back, let's say 2014, authentic was not at the top of the list. So I'm curious, George, what are you finding? Are you hearing more about the need for being authentic as a presenter communicator?
Diane, there's no question. Authenticity is a popular topic and a relevant need in leaders today. It's what we want to see. It's what I hear from what I hear from colleagues, from clients, from other guests on the podcast, that it's all about coming across as being real.
Real, yeah. Because that's what conveys trust, and trust builds relationships, and relationships build business. So it's really important, but I think it's also important for our listeners to have a working definition, because it's this nebulous term, executive presence, and we don't know what we're talking about most of the time. So why is this so important? Because it's a leadership skill. It's hard to be an effective leader or respected leader if you don't have a presence about you. It's difficult to be a good speaker and communicator if you don't have a sense of presence. So I want to reiterate again, you don't have to be an executive to have presence. And one of the things I work on in almost any group and individually is creating presence on the platform. Now, you have two different kinds of platforms. You have the virtual stage, which is your screen presence, and you have your stage presence, which is in person, in the room, in a meeting, or on a stage. And so your ability to read the room, as you referred to earlier, is really important. Here's what too many people do. They're talking heads. They've memorized their content and they're blathering on, and there's no relationship. Or they walk into a room and they just start talking and they're all over the place. They're not grounded. So I give people actual practical tools that they can use. So here's one that I'll share with your listeners. Whether you are on a screen or in a in-person meeting, the first thing you want to do is establish a grounding position. Why? Because a lot of times in the beginning, we're fidgeting, we have energy, we don't know what to do with it. So here's what you can do. Put both feet flat on the floor, lean in at a 15-degree angle with both hands on the table. I don't know if you can see this. And what this does is it creates a presence and a grounding. So even if your heart is pounding out of your chest, we don't see it. You look confident. So then the audience responds to you as if you are confident. And then you start to feel more confident. You start to feel their respect and attention. So it starts with little things, but what I've discovered is it's the little things that make the greatest impact. So nobody listening today has to do a big total makeover, but little tweaks along the way will get you to where you want to go.
And Diane, I noticed when you leaned in a little bit, you appeared more intimate, more open.
Yes.
And you looked more comfortable at the same time.
Absolutely. And I have to say, at the beginning of 2020, I had a client call me and she said, Diane, true disclosure, at the beginning of the pandemic, we called in a company to help us with virtual technology and presentations. And she said, I don't like the way my team is showing up. They're slumped. They're not making eye contact. They're not dressing appropriately. Can you do something? So I did, and that was the genesis of my program, Mastering Virtual Presentations. And it's all about your framing, being in the center of the screen, your background, it all communicates a message. So when you talk about appearance, looking polished and being authentic, part of that's your background when you're on screen. So how are you showing up? And I've had people with beds in the background. Not good. So you can have a branded background like what I have, or you can use your home as long as it's professional looking, or an office. But all of these little things add up to an impression, a brand, and executive presence.
And Diane, I've also seen the bed in the background, and I'm thinking this person was a lawyer in a big law firm, and I'm thinking that's the wrong message. We don't want to be thinking about the bed. And yes, and he was dressed. He had a suit and tie on, but there's a bed in the background, and it's just wrong. It's all wrong.
And I bet that was not the intended message, was it? But see, this is what people don't understand about communication. It's not at this level. This is one part of it, but it's not just speaking and presenting. It's everything around you. It's how you comport yourself, how you walk into a room, how you connect. So all of these things have an impact, and they're part of the look and feel of executive presence. So I would say to people, check out your background before you even turn that video on. And if you have beds, try closing your camera, make it audio. Unless you work in a hotel and that's your job, and you change rooms, then yeah, then it's appropriate.
And Diane, what I'm hearing, and I hope that listeners are hearing too, is that the presence is more than just the words you say and what you're wearing.
Absolutely. There are 3 levels. It's your visual, your vocal, and your verbal communication. And when I work with people, with leaders, I tell them that the one thing I will say without exception is that leaders who have executive presence are completely aligned with their visual, vocal, and verbal communication. Because when one of these goes out of sync, George, you lose the message. And when you lose the message, when people are confused and you give a double message, then body language becomes the default. Would you raise your hand for a moment? Form a fist. Touch your chin. Oh, you listened. I heard you pause. Most people do this because when there's a discrepancy, people will believe the visual over the verbal. And so that's why when I coach people or train them, I'm starting at the visual level first, because we see before we hear. We see when someone walks in before they open their mouth. They're communicating a message.
And I imagine that when a person walks in the room, following on what you just said, we see them first. So they haven't started talking yet, but we're already judging them based on what we're seeing, how they move, how they position themselves. And we might have already decided if or not we believe them before they've even said a word.
Absolutely. So you're not speaking, but you are communicating before you open your mouth. Your body is always talking, and your job is to communicate a message, but you also want to keep their attention. Here's the challenge we have today. The world has changed. We have the attention span of a gnat. In fact, I saw some research that said a goldfish has an 8-second attention span and humans have a 7-second attention span. Now, I don't know if that's valid or true, but that's pretty bad. So we, from the get-go, need to get attention. And if people are focusing on what we're wearing or how we're slumping, they're not listening to our message.
And I wonder about, again, how we look, how we stand, how we move. And the reason I asked that is I recall a TEDx event that I attended pre-pandemic, and the person who I thought owned the stage the best she was a dancer. Now, she spoke well, her presentation was good, but she moved. And she owned the stage. And I guess she learned that from dancing.
I would imagine a dancer would have very good stage presence because they're so in tune with their body. Their whole communication is body. It's not the spoken word. So I really believe that's true. And you just gave me an idea. Maybe for some people, taking a dance class would be helpful in their stage presence. And there's so many different aspects to the stage, center, forward, right versus left. They all have different meanings. They're different power positions. And even when I coach people and they're talking about their past versus their future, I will say, stand to your left over here and talk about the past. And then as you go to the right, talk about your future, because we go from left to right when we're talking about a sequence. And so subliminally, you're seeding the audience to understand. If you didn't say any words, but they just saw your body movements, they would get a sense that there was a sequence happening. So all of that is part of your presence and your message. And going back to what you said earlier about, is this inborn? There are some people who are naturals at anything, but even those people have to learn the stage presence and mechanics. And that's why in my book, Knockout Presentations, I have all of these skills broken down. So it's one thing at a time, because your eye contact is different in virtual versus on the stage, and different when you're in a smaller group. So all of these things can be learned. They're techniques.
Eye contact, is that a relevant part of presence?
Absolutely. Because if you're not looking at anybody, you're not connecting. We connect through the eyes. And so let's just talk about US culture, because it is different in other countries. In US culture, what does it mean when we don't look at someone in the eye?
That we can't trust you, that they're hiding something.
Right. Or they're disinterested, or you're communicating they're not important. And so I have a friend whose daughter is in college, and she said, I'm trying to work with her. She doesn't make eye contact enough. And she'll say, you've got to look at people. And she said, even with dating, I'm trying to say, make more eye contact with boys and you'll start to meet more people. So eye contact is a really important skill. They say the eyes are the windows of the soul. So absolutely. And you want to create an intimacy, and you can create that intimacy by looking at one person at a time in a large group instead of scanning an audience, which is more intimidating. So, when you talk about presence, George, and when you talk about skill, with your body language, if you want to be intimate, you're right, you move in. Or if you're speaking to a large group, you walk in closer. And then when you want more formality, you can walk back and be here at the PowerPoint screen. So you're always communicating with your body.
How does a leader, a business leader, develop their body presence, their body skills? How do they become more aware of their body without taking dance lessons?
By getting a coach, by going for training, by getting up, practicing and doing, by watching TED Talks, by watching other videos, even YouTube. Watch what people do and start to analyze it. When I work with people, I train them to be their own coach. So they're not just talking about themselves, but they're watching other people. And I'm asking them, what did you like that they did? What would bring it to a higher level? Because it really increases your powers of observation. And then it is being able to do that and practicing over, because you have to get comfortable in your body. And that takes practice. Using movement. For example, when people are on stage, a lot of times I see them just nervously walking back and forth. Pacing communicates nervousness. So they learn how to use the platform purposefully. So walking and stopping and making a message or a point, and then coming to another side and making a point. It's using purposeful movement, which is part of that presence.
And I suppose it takes a lot of practice for most people.
It absolutely does. Like any skill. Again, this is a skill. It takes practice, but the more you do it, the more effective you can be. And here's where technology can be so helpful, because you can record yourself and you can watch it. You can do a presentation on Zoom and then play it back and see it. I have a software program now that gives me analytics. So now, as I'm recording people, they're getting analytics, not from me, but from the software. So it's more objective. How many ums? How long did you pause? How many words per minute did you speak? All of those things help you understand how to improve your presentation.
Speed of talking, speed of movement. it's better, I've heard, to be slow instead of be fast. Is that true?
What's better is to pause. So it's not so much the tempo, da, 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 or da, da, da. But if you put in a pause, you can have a quick energy. So when I work with people, I don't want to change who they are, but we want to take their natural essence and refine it and amplify it. So putting in those white spaces or those silences in between are powerful. I just read something that was really exciting, George. It was about the speechwriter for Obama when he gave his presidential speech. And he met him after he wrote it, and he said, you know, it's good. It hits all the marks. However, can you put in some white space? I need space. And go listen to the jazz musician Miles Davis and Coltrane, and then read James Baldwin, and you will learn how to do that. And he did, and it made all the difference. And there was I think it was Victor Borgia, the pianist, who said, you know, the notes I play like anybody else, but the pause in between, there is the message or the music, or I forgot how he said it, but it was really the power of the pause. So I work on that with people a lot. And when they learn to come to a stop, when they learn to use a dramatic pause, what that does is it allows the message to land, but also it allows for emotion and to have impact. So if you want people to move to action, they're not going to do it because they're in their heads and they're intellectual and they're analyzing. They're going to do it because they feel something. So if you give them time for the emotion to get in, that's impact. So it's not fast, slow. It's about putting in the pauses.
And those pauses can be difficult and threatening to some people because people think, well, I'm supposed to keep talking. I don't want to waste time.
Exactly.
And they end up wasting time because we stop listening.
You know what I tell people, George? If you go rat-a-tat-tat, if you don't put in stops, it's like watching a ticker. Have you ever tried to look for your stock and it's going by fast? There it was. Oh, what was it? 52. What? It doesn't land. And so, yes, it feels counterintuitive, but it's just the reverse. When you pause, you have more impact. Your message lands without a doubt. So energy's good, enthusiasm's good, absolutely. But you can still be really enthusiastic and come to a pause. So it's like a stop sign. Don't go past the stop sign. Come to a complete stop and then move. Let people have time to process. By the way, for people listening who are facilitators, I've heard this complaint as well. Well, I ask people for questions and they don't have any. Or I ask them for ideas and they don't have any. Well, guess what? You're not pausing enough. If you say, okay, what questions do you have? Okay, well, if there are no questions, you know, think about the introverts in your audience. They need processing time. The longer you get comfortable with silence, the more power you have as a presenter, as a facilitator, as a leader, as a manager. And when you are silent, that gives people time to think, but it also sends a message that you want questions. So there's so many applications for the pause. In an interview, if an interviewer asks the question, you answer it, and the interviewer gets silent, guess what happens? You start spilling your guts because you want to fill up that silence. Don't. Learn to tolerate silence and you will have more power in every presentation.
I wonder, do you believe that introverts have an advantage there because they're used to silence?
I don't know. I can't answer that completely because this is more of a presentation technique. You can be a nervous introvert and be rattling on and not know how to pause. So I don't know that it's an extrovert introvert, although extroverts talk a lot more and will probably talk longer. I think the introvert will say less, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're pausing as they're presenting themselves. But interesting question. What's been your experience?
Well, Diane, as an introvert, I've always found that I'm in a group meeting, I'm one of the last people to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because I'm still processing, I'm thinking. The benefit is that I believe I let the other people come up with the easy points. I'm looking for the deeper thought, and that's
Mhm.
just, or that's what I tell myself, anyways. And I do, and people do listen when I speak. So I think it's working, and so I do think, yeah, introverts will think more, they'll think deeper, whereas extroverts want to be speaking first, and they want to be making noise. They just come from different backgrounds, different strengths.
Yeah, and there's a place for both of them, but it is true that if people are listening to you, you're probably saying something that's substantive, and you are putting in some pauses there so they can really hear it and process it. It's not going by like a speeding bullet. So it's really important. And it's important that you honor your style, but it doesn't mean that you're off the hook for participating. And that's one of the challenges I have with some of my clients in meetings, especially women. They're not speaking up, and they'll say, "Oh, I was going to say that, but somebody beat me to it." So I say, try to make it a habit or a goal to contribute something in every meeting, even if it's underscoring someone else's point or supporting their idea. You need your voice to be heard, because if you don't speak at all, pretty soon the perception is that you don't know anything, and you can easily become invisible. So make sure that you're speaking up and speaking out and making a contribution. And again, that's part of executive presence. Leaders make contributions, they share ideas. So really important to do that.
Very true. Diane, for those that are interested to learn more about presentations in general and presence, there's your book, Knockout Presentations, that they can find on Amazon. If they're more interested in learning about your services and what you do, they can find you at the website, and the link is in the description below. I'll tell people right now, the website is DiResta.com, and that's DIRESTA.com. Diane, just before we wrap up, if you could sit down with an aspiring business leader, male or female, who not totally comfortable in the workplace yet. They're working on it, though. They have promise. If you could sit down with them and offer them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice to develop their personal presence so that people look at them saying, executive potential there. What might be those 1, 2, or 3 pieces of
All right,
advice?
first thing, it's about mindset. So develop a positive mindset by listening to positive webcasts or read positive books. But whenever you find yourself saying something negative, turn it into something positive. I'm not a good speaker becomes I'm learning to be a good speaker. So be your own best friend. Secondly, learn to be a good communicator. Do whatever you can. Find mentors, go to classes. By the way, I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Diane DiResta. I have 100 videos on there. So follow that. You can also go to my Clubhouse, Confidence, Clarity, Charisma, and be part of the conversation. So have a positive mindset, learn the skills of communication, and find a mentor. Find somebody that you want to be like, or who can be a good advisor to you as you are learning how to be a leader.
Positive and helpful advice. My guest today is Diane DiResta, reminding you that there are 3 aspects when it comes to executive presence. That's gravitas, communication, and appearance. And guess what? The most important, most relevant is gravitas.